Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar on how to transition static performance reviews into an ongoing performance management process. My name is John Smith. I'm Director of Enterprise Business Solutions here at CRG emPerform, and have the pleasure of taking you through the presentation today. Do want to say a warm welcome to everyone. Thanks for taking the time out in these extraordinary times. I hope you're all doing okay and, like us, making it through this crazy time we're all experiencing. Just a little bit about us before we jump in. We have been developing emPerform since 2004. This is a highly flexible performance management technology that helps organizations around the world simplify, automate, and improve their performance management process. It's got lots of pieces in it. Highly intuitive, very configurable, and all-inclusive in nature because it does things more than just performance. We've got a compensation piece in there you can link to performance. We've got a 9-box, we got 360 reviews and all kinds of other things, but our claim to fame is that everything we do is included. You're going to see various pieces of that in the latter part of the demonstration today, and it's just good to know that that platform and what you see is an all-inclusive solution. In terms of our agenda, we're going to spend the first part of the presentation today talking about static performance reviews and the issues and challenges with that. And I think, it's probably self-evident when we go into that what those are, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think more importantly, we're going to talk about what some other organizations are doing, and we're going to share some of our experience and the things we see with our clients to help really, improve the continuous feedback elements and a higher frequency of conversation in these review processes. We're going to talk about how you can transition your workforce to a more dynamic performance review process, and we'll show you a little bit about that with the software, so you can actually see it sort of come to life and understand how technology can play a role in helping to drive adoption and helping to improve this process. So let's start with this, the definition of static, and maybe this applies to this whole topic. Lacking in movement, action, change, especially in a way viewed as undesirable or uninteresting. Does it sound familiar? Well, for many organizations today that face the traditional performance review process that happened once a year, they would say, and maybe their employees would say, yes, you know what? That definition does sound very familiar. We all know that the once-a-year process isn't enough. And in fact, over the last 17 years with emPerform, we've seen again and again and again that when organizations come to us looking for instance, technology to help them improve the process and automate the process, it's also very much about saying, hey, we need to engage our employees more than once a year because there's all kinds of challenges that are happening out there with this process when it's running once a year. And let's just do a quick recap of why we need things to change. First and foremost, we know many organizations struggle with engaging employees in a dialogue more than once a year. And so the accepted norm seems to be to just keep doing that because it's a struggle to change it. And hopefully today's webinar is going to help with that. Feedback, often not reflective of the entire performance year. If we get really, really critical about this and talk about, what the main issues are, we all know about things like recency bias, and it's a natural human tendency to only be able to think about performance in the recent past and the recent dealings we've had with someone. So, this becomes a real big challenge as we go through it. I think we all know that the once-a-year discussion destroys the credibility of feedback because it's not timely. And if it's not timely, people they may put blinders up to listening to it. Human beings want feedback in real time. We know that. And so we want to encourage a process that brings more timely feedback to it. Many people cite this as the single biggest reason the traditional static appraisal fails. Fast feedback and ongoing performance discussions are providing the opportunity for quick course correction and can prevent performance issues from growing. And I think you'll see when we continue to talk about this, that's a central theme of this, that it's not just to say, let's meet more frequently, but it is to adjust and change path and change course correction. And, oftentimes this comes up when we talk about goal management and objectives, that have really become more of a living document. In that old traditional process where we set objectives at the beginning of the year and we go out and do our work, and then at the end of the year we come and say, how did we do? we're missing the most important step, which is the course correction, the changes, the business change, the organization change, the directive change, everything changed, and we need to make changes to our plan. And so this is another critical element to really saying, hey, you know what? Ongoing performance discussions can add value in this area. Companies have limited visibility into performance health. And you know what? Whether that's once a year, it's almost impossible, because then you're taking at one point in time, but it actually is something we need to think about even in a continuous feedback process, that we want to be able to understand the investment we're making in the talent that we have, how that's doing, what it says. For most organizations, their people costs, as you know, are the single biggest cost on the financial statement, on the P&L, and we want to understand how that investment's working for us. So, again, that's a critical problem with these once-a-year reviews. And managers find it challenging and time-consuming to tackle it all at once. We just came out of an implementation at a client who is in healthcare. They're a hospital in the United States, and 2,000 employees. And they had a once-a-year focal date review process. And there was one manager in there who had 120 direct reports. And I said, oh my gosh, I don't understand how this person can actually get through performance reviews for 120 people when you're mandating that they do it in 4 weeks in February. And so that organization needed to shift to an anniversary style review, just to appease the fact that we can't have one manager doing reviews for 120 people at one time. That just points to this, though. Whether you have 6 direct reports, 12 direct reports, if your performance review process is only once a year on a focal date, it's extremely difficult to give, as a manager, to give all your insight, reflection, and deep thought into the process to really help the person and help the employee grow and give them effective feedback to grow. So, this obviously reverberates in what the employee thinks of the process. And so again, just something here that is really problematic with these once-a-year reviews. And then the next piece is the one we hear a lot, which is employees are asking for feedback. And some people will say to me, well, it's the younger folks that are asking for feedback. And in fact, the research out there shows it's not. Any age demographic in organizations these days wants regular feedback. And that's just black and white. They do. And this is something that, again, encourages us to look at, hey, ditching these static reviews and going to something with a greater frequency of check-in. And the statistic here, 65% of employees want more feedback. And often the only channel of feedback is the well-known and dreaded performance reviews. More than 92% of performance reviews take place either semi-annually, annually, or they're never scheduled in the first place. And so obviously these are the things we want to avoid. Probably many of you coming onto the demonstration today live in this and can relate to some of these, maybe all of them. And hopefully the path forward here is to show you a different approach and how we take it. And often I would say how, like the vast majority of our clients we bring onto our platform, how they're structuring things. So let's step back and understand this new world of performance and what's happening. And one of our favorite things to do when we look at the performance world is to look at some big organizations and look at what they're doing with their performance management process. And in this case, I've chosen 3. These 3 are 3 I like to talk about a lot because they have made significant changes to their performance management processes over the last 5 years. They're big names, everybody knows them. But I think what's more important is that they're big organizations. So the dramatic shifts they've taken in some of these impact hundreds of thousands of people. And so it's really interesting to look at what are they doing and why are they doing this. Let's start with GE. So GE, probably the bellwether organization to look at when it comes to performance management, because they famously had a very traditional process, where employees were rated in a very formal way once a year, and the bottom 10% of the ratings were actually dismissed. They called it a rank and yank process. And, it's very well known. If you read the Times of Jack Welch and the literature on GE, you'll read about this process. So About 5 years ago, they decided to abandon it. They decided to ditch it altogether and move to a very frequent feedback process that's enabled through technology application they built themselves. It's called PD at GE, which stands for Performance Development at GE. And this app allows employees to give feedback, but importantly, to ask for feedback. And the app is designed to encourage continuous feedback across the organization, employee to employee, as much as possible. And GE recognized that their workforce has changed, and they've really moved to a highly matrixed organization, and that this old-fashioned once-a-year rank and yank system just didn't work. So this is an interesting organization because that's a very bold change to make. It's a radical change is what we'd call it. And not everybody goes the radical approach that GE did, but it's interesting to look at that when we consider just the sheer number of employees they have and how that hits the process. Adobe is another interesting one to look at. And Adobe had gone from, a time-consuming stacked rank system to a less formal but more frequent check-in system. So the idea here is that managers and employees meet for check-in discussions at least once a quarter, and the discussion covers 3 topics: expectations, feedback, and then growth and development. And the growth and development part is learning and development, but also a little bit of career development in there as well. The discussions happen in real time. They do not involve ratings. So this is a quarterly discussion without ratings. The lack of ratings in the performance review processes that come up from time to time, people ask about, well, how does that impact decisions that are being made? How does it impact compensation? And if you were to ask Adobe about that, they'd say they've trained their managers in their merit review process to understand the factors that should be involved in awarding merit, and the managers are given a budget, and they're given discretion on how to award those merit changes. So Adobe's very interesting. Adobe's proud of this process that they've put in place. You can actually go to the Adobe website, and I'm sure if you go Google Adobe's quarterly performance review process, you can sign into their website and actually download a book that deals with and resources that show you how they structure their quarterly review process. They've opened that up to the world. Of course, we at emPerform have lots of very good research and topical advice to share, and I encourage you to check out our website, employee-performance.com, because there's blogs and articles and white papers and case studies and great things there as well. But this is an important one to look at, and quarterly check-ins seem to be something that sticks in the new world. We are seeing lots of interest in that. The third organization that we talk about is Deloitte. And Deloitte, again, they had the very traditional process with cascading objectives, numeric ranking, 360 reviews. They claim that they changed their process because one of the factors was just sheer amount of hours being spent on performance review in the past, which they said it was up to 2 million hours collectively spent in the organization giving rankings to people and giving ratings to people. So they wanted to simplify the process, and they wanted to stop asking so many people to weigh in on each other and provide feedback to each other. They're obviously a very project-focused organization. They moved to 4 questions that they ask a manager. Once a year, they ask a manager these questions. Given what I know of the person's performance, and if it were my money, I would award this person the highest possible compensation increase and bonus. And you have an agree to strongly disagree scale for these questions. Second question, given what I know of this person's performance, I'd always want him or her on my team. Interesting question. Third question, this person is at risk for low performance, yes or no? And fourth question, this person is ready for a promotion today, yes or no? So they've boiled down a traditional process into 4 questions, but it's not really just 4 questions. What they're also doing in addition to the once a year 4-question process is they're encouraging managers to have weekly check-ins with their team members. And these are real, they're monitored, and their claim is that the very frequent check-ins are the team leader's killer app. So they don't need technology to do it. They need lots and lots and lots of check-ins to do it. These are three organizations that have made tremendous changes. They are really, really, really focused on increasing the frequency of feedback, whether it's GE through an app, whether it's Deloitte along the same lines but not needing an app to do it or technology to do it, or whether it's Adobe with a very structured quarterly check-in process. They've all made radical changes. And so the question becomes, what does it mean for the rest of us? Do we look at these three and say, I want to pick one of those models and that's what I want to do? What do we think about this? Well, for most of us, it's a lot of confusion. And I think that's what we see. And part of the challenge with performance management is there isn't necessarily a right way to do this. So what we want to understand is, how are other people incorporating elements of this? What does it actually mean? What we see is that enabling ongoing performance management is different for every company because it means different things to different organizations. The weekly check-in that Deloitte does may not suit a brick and mortar type shop on Main Street. It just doesn't work. The flip side of that is that there may be a quarterly review process that does work. It may be an ad hoc review process that works. So we have to understand it's going to be different for each organization. It's often accomplished through a phased or hybrid approach, which means that we don't necessarily boil the ocean like, say, GE does and drop the very traditional performance review process and say to everybody, here's an app, start using it. That we phase it in over time and we adjust elements. And there needs to be buy-in and training. Obviously, there needs to be oversight. Feedback alone isn't enough. It's got to be combined with the ongoing discussion around goals, behavior, and expectations. That last bullet there, I think, is extremely important because one of the things that's fundamental in all of these systems that we look at through all of these organizations is that goals and objectives have maintained and stayed a very important part of those systems. In the Adobe quarterly check-in, when they check in and they talk about goals and objectives, I think they call it a roadmap, if memory serves correct. That has not gone away. And what really it is to say, hey, we start the cycle with a strong foundation of goals and objectives planning, and that gives us the substance to start the discussions, to start the check-ins, to start the performance review dialogue. We've spent a lot of time on this and sort of figuring out what is appropriate for what organization and how to make these changes. And we call this reviving the performance review. And it's a presentation that I've given at various SHRM shows over the last few years. We've done some HR.com webinars on it. I would encourage you to go to our website and take a look at that, employeeperformance.com, and you can certainly look at reviving the performance review. And we spend a lot more time in there trying to figure out, hey, what kind of model is suitable for your organization? Is it a traditional model? Is it sort of modernized where we take a traditional model, but we add some check-in stuff to it to modernize it? Or are you in the category where radical would work for you, where it's just a big change like what GE did? Would that work for your organization? We give you a framework to understand where you fit and what to do. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I would absolutely encourage you to take a look at that webinar. And we also know employees want feedback. Companies who incorporate more touch points and quality discussions around performance are more likely to experience greater employee satisfaction and engagement, increased performance, decreased turnover, better communication, greater company success. I mean, there's even thought process out there that says companies who incorporate a more frequent performance review process see greater profitability. Maybe it's the more profitable companies are the ones that are incorporating the more touch points, but I don't think so. I think we all know that there's an obvious part of overall organizational performance that is reflective of happy and engaged employees. And so if this is something where you see a benefit, if this is something you can line up with, then this is again another reason to consider just making this change. So incorporated continuous feedback becomes one of the critical discussion points when we talk about this sort of modernization of the traditional review process. And how to incorporate continuous feedback could really be the main theme of it. And what we have to figure out is, what does it actually mean? And so it could be any number of these things. It could be combining informal check-ins and with detailed and frequent performance notes or logs. I have a customer, always remember, he said to me, he's like, John, listen, I'm not worried about performance discussions taking place. They're happening. They're happening out there in the day-to-day work employees and managers are doing. What I am worried about is we're not documenting it. So let's separate the fact that it's happening from the fact that it's not documented. And so if we think about that, we think about, yeah, like I have informal check-ins with my manager on a frequent basis. I don't always take notes. Maybe one of us should start. Maybe it would be helpful to have the quarterly check-in, and that's something we do in our organization, is have that quarterly check-in where at least we are making some notes and trying to practice this so that there is some documentation. And it doesn't mean that you have to invest in software technology. Hey, us at emPerform, we'd be very happy if you did, but you could also do this using a Word document. You could do it using email, and of course, lots of performance management technology. Now, consider this though. What if we made documenting performance discussions as easy as sending a text message, right? And that's the thing that we're trying to get through from the technology world, is that we can make it that easy. And as easy as you can text somebody, a friend, a loved one, you could make performance notes and say, hey, you know, just checking in on this, or you did a great job with this, or here's my observation from today. And so this is really something that you could consider, and that's exactly why, to come full circle, these companies like GE, Adobe, and Deloitte are developing and changing their process and developing apps, because they know that we just want to, the ultimate goal is increase the frequency of documented communication on performance, and that will help engage employees. So our conceptual framework with emPerform says something like this. It says, you know, when we do our straight up, you know, sales presentations, when we're talking about software with prospects, we bring this slide up and we say, look, our conceptual framework says it's up to you, really. But what we see out there is something like this. What we see is a beginning of the year process where we set goals and objectives. And then the big part is monitoring through the year. This is the big missing element, is what's going on between goal setting at the beginning of the cycle and evaluation at the end of the cycle. And you know, that's where technology can certainly help. And then, you know, our clients do lots of things in conjunction with performance review. It could be things like 360 reviews. It might be compensation or merit that comes out of it. It could be a formal talent review. All of these things happen in a cycle that encourages continuous feedback and continuous dialogue. And so with that in mind, what I want to do is just visualize this a bit for you over the next 20 minutes and show you how this sort of comes together and what the options are. And let's see, as we do this, whether one of these or some of these might fit with your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, or what you see as your future vision. And so I'm going to go ahead and just switch gears here and open up emPerform. And I've just logged into our sales demonstration environment, and I'm logged in right now as a manager. When we do these demonstrations, we love to show it from a manager's viewpoint, and selfishly we do that because naturally the managers have more to do in the performance review process. For those of you who are watching this who are managers, you know this already, right? You're involved in providing feedback to your team. You may be involved in compensation plans. You may be involved in surveys. You wear lots of hats when we're dealing with employee management and employee performance management. And so this is our application we developed, and you know, I really want to focus in right now on what we're talking about with respect to just modernizing this performance review process. So for us, we always stand back and say, well, let's think of a cycle that starts with goals and objectives planning. And in emPerform, that's as easy as coming in and clicking on a review form. And in this case, hey, we've got a review form that opens up and it goes right to the objectives page. So at the beginning of a cycle, we're setting the stage for effective performance by ensuring the employee and manager both have an opportunity to collaboratively design, develop, and come up with and finalize objectives for the coming cycle. And for organizations, we're not saying that these are static. We're not saying these won't change. This objectives list could be a living document. It's something we're going to come back to throughout the year. And in fact, at the top of the screen, you can see we visualize the process. And we visualize this process at the top because we want people to know that this isn't just a set it and forget it stage, that in fact we are coming back in. We'll do monitoring, we'll do mid-year, we'll do more monitoring before we get to the end of the cycle and we ask employees to come in and do their review. So right away an employee's engaged, they know that, hey, I'm entering a process here that's got multiple steps in it and I can see out into the future. I can see out into 2020 by July 13th, I'm going to have had a mid-year where we will talk about these very objectives that we're setting right now. Now, for us, objectives mean lots of things, right? It means we might have organizational company-wide objectives. Everybody shares them. This would be something like this one I have here on quality and safety. It might be that managers have set some objectives in advance. It could be that employees are coming in to add objectives. And it's so easy. You just, click on an objective here and it'll come up and show you the definition of it, right? And you can, again, you can come up with your own characteristics of how you want to drive objectives and goal management. Obviously, one of the frameworks that's very popular is the SMART goal framework. With our clients, lots of them use it, some of them don't, but the big idea is that we structure an objective with milestones, with due dates, with linkages to other organizational objectives or KPIs, so that it's got some substance, so that when we come back, say at the end of the quarter or in an ad hoc check-in and say, how are we doing with this objective, we can reflect on how we defined it and how we structured it. One of the things our clients really appreciate is that adding goals and objectives in emPerform is really simple. You can come in and literally type in a new goal. And if you're creating a team goal, you would create it here. And as quickly as you've created it, you can share it with members of your team. So, it's really easy to create and assign team goals. It's a click of a button. And, my goal now, my team goal, I'm going to track throughout the year. And those employees who've had it assigned will also track it throughout the year as we go forward. So this goal setting phase that we do becomes really, really important in emPerform. And again, we want to think about it like structuring a plan for the future, that this is fundamental to the ad hoc check-ins. It's fundamental to quarterly check-ins, monthly check-ins. Frequent check-ins need a topic, and no better place to start than what did we say we were going to work on? What was the plan we put together? And if you go look at Adobe, if you go look at GE, if you go look at Deloitte, they're still very goals and objectives focused, and those plans are very goals and objectives focused. Development plans are another thing. Learning and development. What are we trying to accomplish? Again, in the Adobe system, they're coming up with, this is the third pillar of it, where we said there that they absolutely want to make sure that that they're checking in on growth and development at least quarterly. So this is a very important part of their process, where it could be career goals, it could be learning and development. How are we tracking? How are we doing? What support can the organization provide to you so that you hit your goals and objectives? So this is a starting point. Then it gets interesting. You start saying, well, what are we going to do now? Because some of you out there would have that process. It might be done in Word, it might be done in Excel, I don't know. Maybe there's technology that does it, but what are we going to do now for the next, 10 months till we meet again at the end of the year, if that's the case? And this is where this starts to get interesting. So a couple of things. For starters, we might say, well, let's come up with a quarterly planning process. And on a quarterly basis, we're going to formalize quarterly check-ins, as you can see here at the top of the screen. We're going to ask employees to come in and provide a rating or status on where they are with their goals. So just tell us, is the goal active? Is it in progress? What's happening with it? And, maybe add some progress comments. We could ask managers to come in and provide comments. So there's an ongoing dialogue. And this is something you could do. It could also be as simple as just having an area or a section in a form dedicated to the quarterly review progress notes. And it could be this simple. The idea of this is, of course, when we get to the end of the year, we've got our quarterly progress notes made and defined and visible in the system, so you can see what went on inside here. Another option is to say, you know what, let's actually just create a form where people can go launch a check-in form. at any point, like an ad hoc check-in. And so, you know, in emPerform, we make that really easy. We give you the ability here to create different forms for different people. And we can say, hey, we could have a one-on-one check-in form that a manager or an employee could go launch whenever they think they want to have the one-on-one check-in. What does that look like? Well, let's take a look at one. Let's just go to this April check-in we were doing for Ashley. And here's what happens. You know, we have a one-on-one check-in, the employee's going to review the feedback from the manager, and then, hey, we're just going to say, yeah, we archived. We had the discussion, we took some notes, we archived it. So what's happening in here? Well, we're having a meeting about any of these things. It could be an informal ad hoc, it could be regularly scheduled, it could be kudos. I just want to note it and I want to document it. Key points discussed, progress on goals, action items coming out of the meeting. And, you know, hey, maybe there's some attachments we want to have in here. And once we're done with it, you know, we could actually be filling this out as we're having the discussion, we file it. But the important thing, we submit it. The important thing about emPerform is that in emPerform, employees have profiles. But when we look at what the manager sees for an employee, all of their performance review history is there. So any of the check-in meetings, any of the review forms, anything you've done is documented and you can look back on it. And that history follows the employee through their career at the organization. So a really great way to engage in ad hoc check-ins, to use that sort of ad hoc check-in style form. Now, for those organizations, and as we go to the more radical approach, let's say for those organizations that say, you know what, I like what GE was doing there. They developed this app where people could give each other feedback. We say in emPerform, that's a great option. It may be a great option to stand on its own, but it could also be an option that's used to support you know, a more traditional performance review process where there is goal planning and quarterly check-ins and there is an end of the year review and ratings. You still may want a continuous feedback process to be brought in there. That helps you modernize this traditional performance review process. And so with that, what we said was we've got an app called Tag, and Tag comes in two forms. There's two options here. You can use one or both. You could actually use none if you wanted to. Tag, first of all, has a journal mode where you come in and you add journal notes, right? And if you fix your spelling mistakes, you add your journal notes and you save them. And journal notes are private and confidential to the person making them. Unless you choose as that person to share them, no one's going to see them. One of the nice things about journal mode is that you can journal and you know, save your journal records against employee names. So in this case for Ashley, any of the journal notes I take, I file them against Ashley's name so that later in the year I can come do a quick search on the journals I took on Ashley. The other option, and we encourage this, by the way, because you know I shouldn't go too quickly through journaling. Journaling is key to frequency, engaging more frequency in a performance review process, making it more engaging and increasing the frequency. We encourage journaling 100% of the time across all of our clients because we know it will help reduce or eliminate recency bias. So even if you have a very structured, formal review process and for maybe organizational or industry reasons you can't get away from it, journaling should be encouraged because it's going to help your managers at the end of the year as they go through the process, and it's going to make the observations and comments they provide to the employee more insightful and more meaningful, and those will resonate better with the employee. So journaling is to me, this is absolutely critical. I think 100% of our clients have journal mode deployed. The second side we have is something that's really truly continuous feedback, and this is truly the name. We call it Tag. We call it sending a tag. So in this case, if you deploy sending a tag, what you're actually doing is sending feedback to that individual. In this case, when I click send, I can put some stars on this. You're gonna have thumb up, thumb down, and stuff like that. I could send it to Ashley and you know, say, hey, I want to send it to Ashley. And if I click send, Ashley gets an email that says, hey, you've been tagged in emPerform. Click here to read the feedback. She clicks on it and comes to her tag wall, and it looks something like this. And the tag wall shows the feedback that was provided and who provided it. It shows when it was provided. And you can see here, these are tags. That's what the employee would see. And if they unlock the tag, they can share it with their manager, and the manager will be able to read it. Ultimately, you could decide to allow the sender to also send it to the employee's manager, and that's just an administrative switch in emPerform we throw. So let's think about this. We've got quarterly check-ins happening. We've got the ad hoc review forms going on. We've got this journaling and tag piece, and you're like, okay, let's not create mass confusion. How does all of this come together? What does it actually mean for the performance review process? Because we don't just want a scattered approach of feedback. Somehow we've got to bring the different elements of feedback together. So let's talk about how that looks. At the end of the year, under any of these approaches, you may still have a performance review process. And the performance review process could say, you know what, managers, you come back and actually give people ratings on objectives and competencies, but they're going to be supported by the frequency of feedback elements you've built in, whether that is quarterly check-ins and appear one-on-one check-ins and notes, tag, for instance, you'll see it how it comes together. Suppose I'm giving Ashley a rating here on hosting lunch and learn events. I go in and say, okay, we set this goal up at the beginning of the year. We all agreed it was important. Our latest pulse survey said people want more lunch and learns. Ashley, you've got a lot of value to add here. We want you to do one or a few of them. And Ashley would go in and she'd do her self-assessment. She'd talk about how she was doing. We might see mid-year comments or quarterly comments in here. And as her manager, I can go in and provide a rating. And your ratings could be numbers, text, words, whatever the case is. In this case, we're using an achievement scale. And I believe the goal was achieved. So I would add my comments. But check this out. If we've been using tags and journals, I can also have access at the click of a button to all the tags and journals. The journals I've taken on Ashley throughout the year, as well as the tags she has received from other people. And I can scroll through here and I can read about these. And, look at this. Here's one from Kim Dunn, right around, and I did one about earlier in the year on the same topic. So Kim's tag and my journal, I want to use as support for feedback to Ashley. So we've just created the touch point between frequency of observation, manager comments, but we've done something even more important. We've shown the employee, Ashley, when she reads a review, that her manager has taken the time to understand the feedback coming from around the organization. They've taken journal notes themselves throughout the cycle. All of a sudden, this is a lot more meaningful to them as an employee as well. So, click save, hey, move on, or click next, and it saves and move on to the next goal. In the competencies area, similar characteristics exist. If we were, doing competency ratings on things like, hey, communication, we can have our rating scale in there, and this is Dick Groat's frequency observation scale, which we're big fans of when we rate competencies, and we can spend a lot of time on that topic all on its own, but I'd encourage you to go take a look at that. We could also have the journals and tags here. So, just somebody saying you did a great job in a meeting or a great job in a presentation. You can add those in there, and all of a sudden the employee knows who said it, when they said it, and what it relates to, and you could refer to that in your comments you're providing. So just a really great way to bring more frequency into this process. As we mentioned, it's quite possible you've done one-on-one check-ins throughout the year. So you've got meeting notes, you've got, perhaps you used tag as a way to document that check-in meeting, and you've got it at your fingertips. And then last but not least, the other way to just engage more people in the process would be to say, hey, I want to open this up and invite other people to come and provide feedback to Ashley. Now, this would be a more structured 360 style review where we choose some people to come in and provide feedback. And hey, maybe those people are providing feedback as Ashley's doing her self-assessment, or ad hoc times throughout the year, they're providing feedback. And so the value there is, they simply come into, a feedback process, and they're asked to provide feedback on whatever you like. It could be skills and behaviors, it could be competencies. And when they're done, providing their feedback, they click submit. But the great thing that comes back for this manager is that at a click of a button, they can see out of the 9 people that were nominated to provide feedback, 5 went in and provided feedback, and now the manager can actually use this to help frame the discussion and frame the development opportunities for the employees. So in emPerform, lots of ways to bring more voices in the process, but more frequency of feedback to the process. And I think I still come back to one of the great things that we have is not just our big administrative appraisal year process that runs all year. We have the ability in emPerform to create, specific forms for specific purposes that a manager or an employee themselves could go launch. And, we saw earlier, I want to have a one-on-one check-in, but here's another one that could be really good. I want to have a project review. So at the end of a major project, I, as the project manager, am going to launch a project review and ask the project team members to come in and provide feedback on an individual. And that could be a great way to do it. Likewise, we could do performance improvement plans. We said at the beginning of this webinar, we want to ensure the frequency of feedback happens for quick course correction. If it got to the extent that, hey, conversation isn't working, we've got a challenge or a performance challenge here, we need to get it documented, then let's give the manager the ability to launch a performance improvement plan form themselves, so they can go in and document the issue. And look, this is so simple to come in and do. You literally come in and say, hey, I'm gonna launch this form, and I'm gonna go ahead and launch this for Ashley. I follow a quick wizard. It tells me right away that Clinton and HR is going to be notified, and I finish and launch it. A few clicks and that form is now open, and I actually go into this and say, I got to fill in some stuff to document a performance issue I've seen with Ashley. Once I'm done doing that, it's going to go over to her for an acknowledgement, and then the system's going to force a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in. And so what I would do is come in here and, we'd start documenting the performance issues. What was the issue? And maybe it's a productivity issue, and I need to really go in there and talk about this productivity issue. So I'll add it here, click on it, and I'll go in and fill out, hey, where's the expectation gap? What's the future expectation? What are the follow-up dates? This can be framed as being very positive and very positive for quick course correction. But all of these pieces come together, I hope, to give you an idea of options. At this stage, it's simply to say, what are the options that are available? What can we do? What does this look like? And so really simply, we could say, let's encourage employees and managers to have a quarterly check-in. As we get more sophisticated, we could give managers discretion to have ad hoc check-ins when they feel it's appropriate. And we want to get documentation of those ad hoc check-ins. That's the key. On a traditional review process, we'd embed those document notes either as an attachment or as part of the annual review form. In a really radical approach, we'd say, let's use something which got continuous feedback loops in it. And some organizations will solely use continuous feedback loops. We encourage organizations to use the continuous feedback loop as part of the process, as support for the process. And you saw that today when we looked at TAG. So that's really a live, living example of how we bring this to life in technology. As we go back to the presentation, let's just take a look and see what questions have come in. If you've got questions, I encourage you to ask them. Please go ahead and look. And I do want to remind you, I'm going to take a look at the questions, but just while I'm doing this, we do have great resources available on employee-performance.com on our blog. Lots and lots of great material there, very informative stuff. Again, you can look at our Reviving the Performance Review. Our rating scale guidebook is something that you'll get a kick out of. I've referred to already here in the presentation a few things on rating scales. We got our own take on that, and we show them in our demos. Also a checklist for regular check-ins, and again, a great resource to have. So let me just go ahead and actually take a look at any questions that we've had that have come in. And yeah, so the first question that I'm seeing in here is about I don't understand how TAG actually would work in reality. Do people use it for both positive and negative feedback? And the answer to that question is that TAG gets used primarily, I would say, at most of our clients. In reality, it's being used to bring positive feedback to the employee. So I think if it's structured feedback that is, developmental in nature, most managers and most organizations would expect their managers to, formally, write something into the review and have a discussion with the employee about it. That's not to say you couldn't use tag for that. People are using it for that, but in the reality, feet on the ground, it's really for documenting shout outs, those yellow sticky notes that would end up on somebody's door, like, I saw you at your best today. And my own take is that's great if you can do it for that, because one of the things that is really important in there is that we're giving people the framework to say, hey, you know, we can use that frequent feedback to support reviews, but it's also positive. And the positive piece is that for a lot of organizations and employees, performance review has not been a positive process. So bringing the positive overlay to it, really, really crucial. I tell our clients that I believe it helps with adoption of new technology, that the first message an employee gets is from somebody else that says, I saw you at your best today. Here's a tag in emPerform to go read my rave review of what I just observed with your performance. That's a lot better way to start with emPerform than is, your performance review is due in 30 days. Please make sure that you've gone through and done your self-assessment. So again, it's up to you, but think about just that angle that I just said, and it's really good. Another question, how do you know if managers are giving the right feedback? So that's a great question. How do we know if the managers are giving the right feedback? So tricky part there. One of the things that we do inside emPerform, and one of the things we encourage is that we have the ability for other levels of management to read the reviews or just to look at them. So if you're concerned that you've got managers out there that aren't providing the right feedback, first and foremost, we'd recommend training on that. And I think that needs to be part of the launch of a performance review process. Secondly, we can build into the process other layers that review the performance appraisal before or after the discussion with the employee to ensure that the feedback meets organizational expectations. And then the other thing we encourage, and just real quick, I just want to show you something. The other thing we encourage is calibration, and calibration is often lost in the performance review process. Calibration means that in this scenario, I put all our employees in a 9 box, and I'm telling you the results are high performance, high potential, people doing a great job for us every day, click their name, you know, see their profile. But what's important about this? What's important is we encourage this as a management team after the review's completed to look at it and say, do we have the right people in the right boxes? Because this is what the performance management process is telling us. Did we get this right? And that will always help that discussion with ensuring that our managers are giving the correct feedback, but also that they're using the process correctly and providing the correct ratings. Next question. What is the easiest way to engage employees in more frequent discussions? Do you make it formal or just encourage it? So there's been a bit of both here. I don't know that there is the easiest way. I think there's an organizational approach, and I think you as HR managers and HR professionals would know what's going to resonate in your world and in your organization. So I'll give you, for instance, sometimes when we go through the process of explaining tag, the immediate response is, there's no way that will work in our organization. John, we're too old-fashioned. We can't even get people to consider doing performance reviews. I'm not going to throw them into tag right away. And I agree with that. And I would say, you know what, in that case, we're going to turn tag off, but let's encourage journaling. Then in that scenario, we're encouraging it. So that's encouragement. Okay. So last question, is there more options than what you guys have shown here today? And the answer to that is, of course, there's more options, and there's different things you can look at, and we'd be very, very happy to help you through this process. And just reach out to us at employee-performance.com and have a dialogue with us and tell us about what you're looking for and what you're looking to do, and we can share our expertise and tell you how we would approach it, have a discussion about it, show you some things like I've done today, and see if it would help. And ultimately, understand that we come at this with years and years and years of experience doing it. One size does not fit all. There are lots of options. At the end of the day, there is not necessarily a right or wrong in performance management. So all we can do is understand the lay of the land and say, we believe for the following reasons this would be successful, and here's why. And you probably have a very good idea of what that is. In fact, as a vendor, I can tell you, most of our clients come to us with a very good idea about what they have and what they want to do. So I hope this was helpful for everyone today. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Do feel free to contact us at any point, book a demo, see your forms in emPerform, schedule a discussion. And just to let you know, we do have lots of rapid ways, rapid packages to get you up and running quick with technology like this if you think it'll help. So thanks very much for joining us. Have a great day, folks. Bye-bye.